October 1978. The wind howled across the barren plains of Nebraska like a warning whispered from the earth itself. Somewhere between the isolation of nowhere and the silence of forgotten roads stood Hollow Creek, a faded patch of farmland no longer marked on official maps. It was the kind of place you don't find unless you're lost or pulled there. For years, the farm had survived droughts, storms, and solitude, until one strange autumn night, it simply stopped. 8 workers lived on that land. Strong men, reliable, known by first name at the local diner, always up before dawn, boots on the soil. But by morning, not a single one remained, their beds untouched, breakfast half prepared, radios still playing static. There were no signs of a break-in, no blood, no struggle, just an unnatural kind of stillness. And one man, barefoot, trembling, and covered in dust, seen hours later staggering down Highway 29 several miles away, eyes wide as if witnessing something that never left his mind. His name was Paul Whitaker, 24, farmhand, ordinary. But the look in his eyes was anything but. He didn't scream, he didn't cry, he didn't even respond to the sheriff's questions. He just kept walking, muttering the same sentence under his breath like a prayer he didn't understand. The earth, it breathes. The air around him was dry, but his skin was cold. When officers tried to touch him, he flinched as if the contact hurt. He never explained where he'd come from or why he was alone. All he ever gave them was that one chilling phrase, over and over, "The earth, it breathes." The sheriff's truck pulled into Hollow Creek just past 6 a.m., headlights cutting through the last shreds of morning fog. What they found was not chaos, not destruction, but something far more disturbing, a place abandoned in perfect order. The kitchen table was still set for dinner, 8 plates with half-eaten meals, steam stains still fresh on the inside of a silver thermos. The radio on the counter crackled low with a country song stuck on repeat, skipping slightly like a broken lullaby. There were no overturned chairs, no shattered glass, no hurried footprints leading to an escape, just that haunting, unnatural quiet, the kind of silence that made the hairs on the back of your neck rise without explanation. It was like the farm had exhaled and never inhaled again. One of the deputies described it as walking into a moment that refused to move on. Outside, the morning dew clung to the grass, undisturbed. No tire marks, no signs of anyone coming or going. But then, they noticed them. Bare footprints leading from the main house, past the barn, and disappearing into the soybean field beyond. They were small, human, still fresh, but they stopped halfway into the field as if the person had simply vanished mid-step. No return prints, no dragging marks, just the final impression of a heel pressed into damp soil, and then nothing. They checked the barn, empty, no sign of life or struggle. The animals were untouched, yet eerily quiet, as if they too had witnessed something and chosen silence. It wasn't just the absence of people, it was the presence of something else, something the land itself refused to speak about. The sheriff radioed in for backup, but even the signal sounded strange, warbled by static that hadn't been there just minutes earlier. And then came the unsettling realization. Everything looked like it should be alive, but nothing felt alive. As if time had paused, just long enough for something to step in and take what it wanted. The tapes were discovered in the fall of 1993, buried in a rusted metal filing cabinet inside the remains of the Willow Ridge Asylum near Kansas City. They were unlabeled, just a set of dusty reel-to-reels wrapped in brittle gauze and marked with one word, Whitaker. The audio was warped, but Paul's voice still cut through the static like a warning clawing its way out of the past. Calm, distant, and broken in places, he spoke of that night as if it were happening all over again, like he never really left it. He described lying in his cot when the floor beneath him began to throb, not shake like an earthquake, but pulse, like the beat of something massive buried far below. Then came the fog, a strange bluish mist that curled through the fields outside like fingers reaching through the furrows of the soil. He said the air changed, became heavy, as if the oxygen had been drained and replaced with something older. And then, the voices. They called out the names, he whispered on the tape. Each of them, one by one, from under the ground, not loud, not shouting, whispering, as if the earth remembered them and wanted them back. He paused, then added in a trembling breath, "The earth doesn't want to be disturbed. It wants to be left alone. But we dug too deep. We dug where we shouldn't have. The recording ends with a sound, something rhythmic, like a heartbeat, muffled by layers of dirt and stone. Researchers thought it might be background interference, but those who listened carefully weren't so sure. Historians began to piece together forgotten reports. Old salt mines sealed off under Hollow Creek in the 1940s, officially closed for unrecorded hazards. Whispers among native communities spoke of that area as forbidden land, a resting ground protected by symbols carved into stone and buried beneath the fields long before settlers ever arrived. And then, in 1995, a corporate agriculture group attempted to buy the property. 2 days into the soil analysis, they pulled the offer. One investigator claimed, "There's movement down there, but not seismic. It's like the earth is breathing slowly, and it doesn't want us on its back." In the sweltering stillness of an Illinois summer, the land around Ashmore Hollow seemed frozen in time. Sun-scorched fields stretching endlessly, cicadas screaming from the trees like ticking clocks too loud to ignore. The Griggs family farm had long faded from memory, passed down like an old ghost story through generations, until it landed in the reluctant hands of Walter Griggs, a mechanic-turned-farmer who wanted nothing more than peace and routine. But routine, it seems, had other plans. One morning in July 2011, Walter stood at the edge of his porch, mug in hand, and squinted at something that felt wrong. The old brick well, dry for decades, once used as nothing more than a quaint centerpiece in the middle of the yard, wasn't where it used to be. At first, he thought he was imagining it. A trick of the sun, maybe. But no, it was closer, at least 20 feet. Closer to the barn, like it had shifted on its own, sliding silently through the soil while the world slept. No tire marks, no machinery, no footprints, just that well, impossibly closer, like it had taken a step in the night. At first, everyone laughed it off. Family, neighbors, even the mailman, all quick to blame Walter's imagination or too many long days in the sun. "It's just your eyes playing tricks," they said, sipping sweet tea on the porch, waving off his concerns like buzzing flies. But as the days wore on, the laughter quieted. A neighbor mentioned it in passing. "That old well of yours, ain't it closer to the fence now?" Another swore it looked deeper than before, darker somehow, like the shadows inside it had grown teeth. That was when Walter decided to prove it. He drove wooden stakes into the earth, evenly spaced around the well, and wrapped a line of bright orange string around the perimeter. Every morning he checked, and every morning the lines were off, shifted, pulled taut in new directions. In 3 nights the circle had skewed, not much, just inches at first, but enough to know it wasn't in his head. The well was moving. Not rolling or sinking, but sliding, creeping, slowly, quietly, with purpose, as if it knew exactly where it was going. In an effort to silence his own doubts, or perhaps to confirm the ones clawing at the edges of his sanity, Walter installed 3 motion-activated cameras around the property. One on the barn, one on the back porch, one aimed directly at the well. For the first few nights, everything was quiet. Grainy nighttime footage, the usual flicker of bugs in the infrared, the distant sway of trees in the wind. But then came the pattern. Every night, precisely at 2:37 a.m., the footage from all 3 cameras turned to snow. Not a slow fade, not interference building over time, just a sharp cut to static, as if something had severed the feed in an instant. Curious, Walter scoured the recordings frame by frame. On the 3rd night, buried in less than half a second of corrupted data, he found it. A tall figure, impossibly thin, featureless and black as oil, standing beside the well, one arm extended, not toward the camera, toward the house, toward him. Then gone. No footsteps, no movement, just that single, chilling gesture. Within a week, the cameras stopped recording entirely. The devices were fine, the memory cards intact, but every file after that night was empty, as if something had decided it had been seen enough. The last man to stay on the property was a hired caretaker named Elijah Marsh, quiet, dependable, known to carry a flask, but never to lie. One morning, Walter found his room empty, bed unmade, personal belongings untouched, except for a single note left on the kitchen table. It talked to me. When they checked the surveillance tapes, there was nothing, just that same dead static at 2:37 a.m. But later in town, Elijah was spotted at a gas station. Pale, drenched in sweat, muttering under his breath. The clerk swore he said, "It's beautiful, the light down there." Then he vanished. No forwarding address, no final paycheck, just gone. After that, Walter left, locked the gates, walked away. Over time, vines swallowed the fences and dust claimed the windows. But the well remained, sometimes behind the barn, sometimes near the silo, never in the same place twice. Locals don't go near it, not anymore. Some say they've seen it in different spots on different days, like it's moving when no one's watching. But it's what they hear that truly haunts them. A child's voice, sweet and distant, whispering from the dark, "Come see, it's beautiful down here." They say if you stare too long into its mouth, you'll start to hear it too. And once you hear it, you never really stop. In the dead heart of Nebraska, where the cornfields roll on endlessly like a golden ocean held frozen in time, the locals have a saying, when the wind stops too suddenly, something else is listening. On one particular night, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. There was no moon, no stars. Even the cicadas, the ever-present background hum of summer, had gone still, as if silenced by something older, deeper. The Keene family sat inside their farmhouse, the windows cracked open in a vain attempt to let in some breeze, when they heard it, soft, dragging footsteps weaving through the corn. Not the panicked scamper of a raccoon, not the heavy gait of a deer, but barefoot, deliberate, human, yet not. At first they tried to ignore it, but the sound kept coming, circling the house slowly, like whatever it was drawing a spiral tighter and tighter. The father, clutching his flashlight, stepped outside with his teenage son trailing behind. The beam of light cut through the cornstalks, and for a moment, nothing moved. Then, between two rows, she appeared. A little girl, no older than 10. Dressed in white, soaked to the skin though there hadn't been a drop of rain in weeks. Her skin was the color of milk left too long in the sun, and her hair clung to her cheeks like seaweed. She wasn't looking at them, just stood there, sideways, head drooped, arms limp, breathing shallow. The father whispered, unsure if he was trying not to scare her or himself. But she didn't flinch, didn't blink. And then in a fraction of a second, the flashlight flickered and she was gone. They searched the fields for hours. Nothing, no footprints, no broken stalks, just an unnatural stillness, like the land itself was holding a secret. At dawn, smoke bloomed behind the house. The old storage shed, the one the grandfather used to sleep in when the house got too loud, was a bonfire. The fire brigade never found a source. No wiring, no gas, nothing. Just ash, and in the center of it all, a patch of scorched earth marked by the unmistakable outline of small, barefoot tracks. The same path the girl had taken. And the earth, it smelled like wet soil, freshly turned, like something had crawled up from beneath and walked out into the night. The sun had just begun to drown behind the fields when Sheriff Davis saw her. A pale smear of white at the edge of the overgrown road, right where the rusted fence met the weeds, half hidden by the brittle remains of last season's corn. He wasn't a man who scared easily. He'd been through meth raids, search parties, domestic standoffs, but something about that still figure chilled his gut like ice water. He slowed the cruiser, squinting through the windshield, thinking maybe it was a coyote or a sack of grain left to rot. But when he stepped out, boots crunching on the gravel, he saw her, a little girl, no taller than his waist, skin like old wax, eyes like black marbles sunk too deep in a face too blank. She stood completely still, watching him. Not blinking, not swaying, just watching. Something about her wasn't right, not in the way horror movies play it, not dramatic, not sudden, just wrong, like a piece in the world had been placed in the wrong puzzle. Davis opened his mouth, unsure if he was going to ask her name or scream, but before any sound left his throat, she turned, not stepped, turned, slowly, stiffly, and slid into the corn, not walking, just melting back into it. The stalks didn't move, the grass didn't rustle. She was there, and then she wasn't. His hands were shaking when he got back in the cruiser. He didn't file a report. Who would believe him? What would he even write? But the next day, the town across the ridge was in panic. A child hadn't come home. Her name was Lila Carter, and she'd been walking to school like she always did. That night, the mother had waited on the porch until midnight. The father had driven up and down the road yelling her name, and by dawn, a search party swept the entire stretch of land, including the abandoned farm the sheriff had passed near. They never found her. But what they did find, buried neatly in the soil where the corn rows began, was Lila's rag doll, its yarn hair matted with dirt, its head poking just above the earth like it had been planted there deliberately. Sheriff Davis didn't speak at the press conference. He barely slept that night, because he knew what no one else did. The girl he saw hadn't come to haunt, she'd come to harvest. Since then, no one in the county doubts the old saying whispered among farmers and passed through trembling lips by gas station clerks. Where she appears, someone disappears. And the worst part, she doesn't show up by accident. She comes for a reason. And once you've seen her, it might already be your turn. It began with a name, just that. A whisper, stretched and syrupy, winding through the corn like a breeze that had learned to speak. The sun had barely dipped below the horizon when Harold McCrae, a third-generation farmer, heard it, faint but unmistakable. Harold. It was the voice of a child, slow, playful, like a melody hummed in an empty playground. He stood up from his work, wiping the sweat from his brow, heart kicking against his ribs. "Who's out there?" he called, scanning the golden rows. No answer. Then again, softer. "Come see, it's beautiful down here." The voice didn't echo. It pressed against him, close, like a mouth too near the ear. Panic blooming, Harold pushed into the field, corn scratching his arms, eyes darting, breath ragged. But the deeper he went, the quieter everything became. Not peaceful quiet, but the kind that prickles the skin. He found no child, no footprints, just stillness, and something else, the sharp, impossible sense that the corn was watching him back. That night, he couldn't sleep. He blamed the heat, the work, his imagination. But as he sat in bed, the room heavy with silence, it came again. Harold, a breathless giggle followed, like a child hiding behind the closet door. He turned on every light, checked every room, locked every window. Still, she spoke, from the walls, from the drains, from the space beneath the floorboards. Her voice always soft, always coaxing. "Come see." In the days that followed, she became bolder. The whisper followed him to the barn, to the store, to church. It crept through the shower steam and curled under the sheets. He stopped answering the phone, wouldn't leave the house. One night, he stood in front of the mirror and saw something behind him, just the edge of a white dress. When he turned, she wasn't there. But the air still smelled like soil, fresh and wet, as if someone had just clawed their way up from the earth. By the third week, Harold abandoned the farm, packed what he could, drove without destination, without sleep, convinced the voice couldn't follow where the corn no longer grew. But it did. Motel rooms, rest stops, a cousin's house in Kansas. No matter how far he ran, she whispered, "It's beautiful down here." Eventually, Harold was found pacing a parking lot barefoot, clothes soaked in sweat, whispering to the pavement. He's been in a psychiatric hospital ever since. Won't speak to the doctors, but his fingernails are always dirty, and he scratches words into the walls with whatever he can find. Always the same phrase, "She's in the corn." The old farm is still there, overgrown, abandoned. Locals say if you get too close, especially at dusk, you might hear it too, a child's voice, soft and sweet, promising beauty, just below the surface.